Hey, welcome back. Today, today you get a top 10 legal questions that I get every so often, and hopefully they're helpful. Worst case, maybe they at least help you sound smarter around your friends. I'm sure you don't need that, but I could always use it. So they're helpful for me. So number one, I bought a car, it broke down. That means it's automatically a lemon. That's false. That's a myth. So there's something, at least in Ohio, called lemon law, and that only applies in very select circumstances. So what that means is you have to have bought a new car. Lemon law doesn't apply to used cars. Not only that, it has to be a car that has suffered significant mechanical problems in the first year or within the first 18,000 miles. Number two, you have to give the manufacturer a reasonable amount of time to fix the problems. Now, if that fits your scenario, brand new car, first year, first 18,000 miles, manufacturer tried to fix it, they couldn't. In that scenario, you may be eligible to get a refund, return your car. So it's the ultimate return plan. Maybe not as good as Costco's return plan, but ultimately not too bad. Myth number two, all contracts must be in writing. Well, again, false. So you can have verbal contracts enforceable, at least in Ohio. Now, there are some exceptions, as there always are. That's what keeps lawyers in business. Can't be for real estate, can't be a prenuptial agreement, can't be assuming somebody else's debt, can't be for the sale of an item that's more than $500. So also can't be for something that would take longer than a year to complete. So anything that fits those exceptions needs to be a contract in writing. But other than that, verbal contracts enforceable. Myth number three, if you have a business and you have workers and you give them Form 1099, that makes them independent contractors automatically. That is completely false. And in fact, usually we run into problems with the Department of Labor or the Ohio Department of Job and Family Services as far as unemployment compensation or workers' compensation. Those are kind of the three big audits that you run into where they're going to try to figure out if your workers were actually misclassified as independent contractors and instead should have been classified as employees. And why does that matter? Because you got to pay payroll taxes for employees. And if you misclassified them as independent contractors and they should have been classified as employees, well, the penalties are massive. So this is not one you want to screw up. So 1099 does not automatically make your workers independent contractors. Instead, there is a multi-part test that whether it's the IRS or the Department, like I said, Department of Labor, ODJFS, whatever it is, this is what they're going to look for. They're going to figure out who actually had the right to control these workers. And if you as the business owner had the right to control them, guess what? They should have been employees. If they had the right to control their own work, then they probably are independent contractors. So they're going to look at who actually directs the work. Do you provide training to the workers or do they get it somewhere else? Are the services these workers providing for you part of their regular function? Meaning, are they framing a house for you and they're part of their framers? They're it's part of their regular function, or are they providing something separate for you? Do you have the right to fire them? But more importantly, do they have the right to hire and fire additional workers, whether they're helpers, assistants, or just additional crew? How is the work scheduled? Are you paying them by the job? Are you paying them by the hour? Do you control when they show up and when they leave, or do you just give them a date range? Who furnishes tools? Do you furnish tools and equipment, or do they bring their own? Are expenses reimbursed? And are they exclusive? This is probably the number one thing. Do they only work for you, or do they provide work for a variety of different companies doing the same thing? So go back to the framing example. If they're a framing crew and they provide framing services for you and 5 other builders, that weighs in favor of them actually being an independent contractor instead of an employee. Next myth, it's one of my personal favorites. The myth is that you can represent yourself in court. Well, okay, I guess that's actually true. You can represent yourself in court sometimes. If you're representing yourself, then yes, you can do that. But you cannot represent your company or your LLC unless you're an attorney. So if you just own a company and your company gets sued, or your company is suing somebody else, and you want to go in there and argue and talk to the judge, guess what? You can't do it. So even if you can represent yourself, a couple words of caution. Number one, make sure you understand what the civil rules of procedure are, right? So what are the rules in the state of Ohio that you have to follow if you're going to be involved in a lawsuit? Number two, make sure you understand what the rules of evidence are. So very important as well, what you can and cannot talk about or introduce into a case. And then finally, there's something called the local rules in every court. So you've got these 3 sets of rules that you need to be aware of. So if you want to represent yourself, good luck. I don't think it's really set up for success, but you could always try. Next myth. Tenants can withhold rent from landlords. That is a big, fat myth, not true. So what tenants can do is they can escrow rent with the court. So where this comes into play is if the tenant is current in their rent, can't be behind. Number two, the landlord is not fulfilling their obligations, so maybe they are not fixing things that need fixed or whatever the case may be. Number three, tenant has given the landlord notice saying, listen, here's what needs fixed and a reasonable amount of time to fix them. If those 3 items happen, the tenant can actually pay the rent to the court, and the court will hold it until the landlord fixes the issue or argues that the rent shouldn't be withheld, and then ultimately the landlord needs to apply to the court to have that rent released to them. But tenants cannot just withhold rent. Next myth. This goes back to representing yourself in court, or even if you have a lawyer. But if you're being sued, the myth is, if I don't show up for court, I can't lose. That is obviously false. Much like if you've ever played sports, if you don't show up for a game, you lose. It's the same thing with court. If you don't show up, you lose. What happens is the other side ultimately will take a judgment against you, and then they start trying to collect, meaning garnishment, foreclosure, attachment of wages or contract funds, anything like that. So show up. And that way, at least you have a chance at winning. Next myth. If you live together, at least in the state of Ohio, for more than 7 years, you are married by common law, meaning it's just a common law marriage. That is false. Common law marriage ended in Ohio in 1991. So it is still recognized in some states, but otherwise you need to actually get a marriage license, get that approved by the probate court, file that. No common law in the state of Ohio after 1991. Now, similarly, moving out doesn't automatically mean you're divorced. So when it comes to marriage, when it comes to divorce, they're both formal procedures. They both have legal implications. You don't just get to kind of wing it and say, hey, we've been together long enough, we're married, or we're breaking up and now we're divorced. Like, it actually takes some legalism to get that done. The next myth, and this one you see a lot, but the next myth that you hear is that if you're in fear for your life, you can shoot anybody, right? If you think somebody's threatening you, you can shoot at them. That's false. Can't do that. There are different doctrines in different states. There might be in your state what's called the castle doctrine, right? So this means you have to be in your home or your vehicle. You must believe that you or your family are in imminent danger of death or very serious harm, and it can't be your fault. Sounds like that one should go without saying, but has to be said. In that scenario, under the castle doctrine, if that applies in your state, then you would have a self-defense or a defense of self-defense in the event you had to shoot someone. Doesn't mean you won't get sued civilly, doesn't mean you won't get prosecuted. It just gives you a defense. And other states have what's called stand your ground. In this scenario, contrary or to compare it with the castle doctrine, you don't have to be in your home, you don't have to be in your vehicle. You still need to be, need to believe that you or your family are in imminent danger of death or serious harm. It can't be your fault, but you're not limited to your house or vehicle. And then finally, there are states that operate under what's called a duty to retreat. And that just means in these same scenarios, whether you're in your home, your car, or not, even if you have a belief that you or your family is in imminent danger of death or serious harm, even if it's not your fault, this means if you have the ability to retreat or escape, then you have to do so. So really important to make sure you understand which one of those doctrines applies in your state and operate accordingly. Next myth, and this one becomes more and more relevant every day, it feels like, but the myth is that if you live in a state where, we'll say medical marijuana, that's the easiest one, medical marijuana is legal, at least at the state level. We know it's not legal at the federal level, at least currently, and you get pulled over, and the myth is that having a medical marijuana card will prevent you from getting an OVI, right? Operating a vehicle under the influence or while intoxicated. That is false. So for those of you out there who were hoping these medical marijuana cards would be a get out of jail free card, absolutely not true. So at least as far as what we have in Ohio, you cannot operate a vehicle if your system contains an excess of the legal limit for marijuana. And if you're stopped and the officer finds or smells marijuana, there's a good chance you'll be charged with an OVI and asked to submit a blood or urine sample. You know, there are some legal limits out there. You know, if you don't know what a nanogram is, it is a 1/1000th of a gram. And so the current THC limits are 2 nanograms per milliliter of blood or 10 nanograms per milliliter of urine. And then, you know, there are metabolite limits of 50 nanograms per milliliter of blood and 35 nanograms of milliliter of urine. I'm not sure how you measure that. I have no idea. I'm not a criminal lawyer. Don't play one on TV. But the key here is if you thought a medical marijuana card was going to get you out of an OVI, it's not. So don't drive high. There you go. Public service announcement. Last myth, okay? If I am married and I pass away, I don't need a will because everything goes to my spouse anyway. Okay, so that's a myth, maybe, I guess is the best way to say that. So this is the chart. I should really figure out how to put this up on a slide. But this is what the law in the state of Ohio says happens to your assets if you don't have a will. And it goes through kind of a fun little exercise there to figure out, are you in a blended family or not? If you are in a blended family, that's what really gets complex, right? So if you're in a blended family and one of the children is your biological child, then that child will get a portion of your estate and your spouse will get a portion of your estate. If you have 2 biological children and you pass away, well, then your spouse will get a different amount and the biological children will get a different amount. You know, it's just kind of a mess, to put it frankly. So do not rely on the myth that if you pass away, everything automatically goes to your spouse. So it depends on whether you have children together, whose biological children are they, were they adopted, all sorts of factors. So do not, don't fall for that myth. And no matter what, I mean, and I think I've talked in other videos about this, but without a will, beware of probate. It's costly, it's expensive, best if you can avoid it. And tell you what, here is number 11, bonus myth, just for you today, because feeling generous, I guess. But the bonus myth is this: if you operate a business as a limited liability company or corporation, the myth is that you can't be sued individually. So while the LLC or the corporation is designed to provide you with a liability shield personally, meaning they can sue your company, but they shouldn't be able to sue you individually, you need to be aware that that can be pierced. So that liability shield can be ignored by the court in a couple of scenarios. And number one would be if you're engaging in criminal action. So if you're using your company to, you know, as a front for a drug dealing operation, guess what? Not going to protect you individually. Number two is if you're engaging in fraud. So think about, you're lying to people, or you're hiding things, covering up things. In those scenarios, that shield, that liability shield, is going to get blown away by the court, and you're going to get sued individually, and you're going to lose. There is one last caveat where, in a scenario where your company is really just more of a sham, and what a court will look at is, does your company have a tax ID number? Does it have bank accounts? Does it have insurance? Is it adequately capitalized? Things like that. So those are the scenarios where you could get sued individually, even though you're operating as a company. Things to be aware of. So hopefully this was helpful. And if you have positive comments, I would love to hear them. If you have negative comments, go post them on somebody else's video. Just kidding. You can post them there as well. Also, if you're watching this on Facebook, be aware that you only may get a part of the video, and I always try to post a video in the comments, so the full length on YouTube's there. Appreciate you guys. Would love it if you would like, subscribe, and share. And if there's something you want to hear about, maybe some sort of legal question, post in the comments, and maybe I'll talk about it. All right, good luck.